All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming today. We're excited to be able to do this presentation and see some familiar faces. So thanks to you all again. My name is Courtney Rice. I work at NAMI with County. We'll tell you a little bit about what that organization is if you're unfamiliar. But today we're going to be focusing on men's mental health and PTSD. So as that is sometimes kind of a heavy topic, as we talk about mental health. Just take care of your needs, especially folks on Zoom, are not able to necessarily check in on you. But if you, for any reason, are feeling upset or some of the content is just a little difficult to digest, feel free to take a moment, step outside. All right, we know that this is a heavy topic, so do what you need to do to take care of your needs. One thing, before I turn over to Amanda, on the evaluations on the front, you'll see, I think it's like the second or third question. It says, what program is this? And you're going to mark NAMI education. If you mark it incorrectly, it's not a big deal. Oh, thank you. I have a microphone. If you mark it incorrectly, it's not a big deal. But if you haven't filled it out yet, just mark NAMI education period. Okay. And then I'll let Amanda get us started.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Light. I also work at Mountain Wood County, National Alliance on Mental Illness here. And I am the coordinator for the peer programming. So I'm going to start it off here. So really, if you haven't heard about NAMI before, National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMIs are everywhere. So we're across the United States. There's state affiliates. So like NAMI Ohio is our state affiliate. And we are the local affiliate, NAMI Wood County. All righty. So just a little bit about us. So our mission is to help provide help and hope to families and individuals living with a mental health condition or their family members through support, education, advocacy. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and all of our support groups and classes are peer facilitated. So what that means is that people with lived experiences facilitate each class. So if you are an individual living with a mental health condition, you facilitate the support group or program for other folks that live with a mental health condition, and same with our family programming as well. So we also do educational presentations in the community, kind of like what we're doing now. We go to a bunch of different organizations to give different presentations. We also are doing an initiative called Stigma Free Company, where we go to local businesses and organizations to give them mental health training. And we also have our mental health conference series that we have every May. We have that over at the Leather Commons building in Perrysburg, and we just set the date for it yesterday. So if you want to save the date, our mental health conference series is May 16th, 2025, and that will be from 9 to 5 p.m. Next slide, please. So here's some of our objectives. So first thing, we're going to kind of paint a picture of men's mental health through some statistics. We'll provide you a brief description of PTSD and what that is. And we'll also kind of tell you what the signs and symptoms of PTSD are. We will share some resources in the community, so where you can go to get help if you're struggling with PTSD or any other mental health condition. And then our last objective is to inform you how to be trauma informed. So recognizing the impact of trauma and how that can affect the person's behaviors and their ways of thinking. Oh, you can see here with this graphic, this is the total amount of males that are in the United States. And then it also has the amount of males affected by depression. So 6 million males are affected by depression. So this is a lot lower compared to women. Men are less likely to experience depression. I feel like some of the statistics can be skewed though, because men are oftentimes less likely to talk about their struggles with depression and less likely to seek help. Next slide, please. All right. So 1 in 5 adults in the United States live with a mental health condition. And this can cause serious costs. Serious mental illness costs America $193.2 billion in lost earnings this year. So this is probably a conservative statistic because the study that actually came up with that figure didn't assess people in hospitals or prisons and included very few people with autism, schizophrenia, and other chronic illnesses that impact a person's ability to work. So 75% of this figure of 193.2 billion is attributed to reduced income for folks living with severe mental health conditions, and then 25% is attributed to maybe an increased likelihood that they will have no earnings, that they're not able to work. So, as we look at the major mental health problems among men, so if you can put them all up on the slide, there we go. So as you can see, there's a lot of trends when you look at these disorders. So, you can see that many men, millions and millions, are impacted by these disorders and experience them. However, less men are, or men are least likely to disclose that they have a disorder and seek treatment. So you can see kind of, as we look at our statistics here, for depression, over 6 million men suffer from depression each year, and then are less likely to kind of report that it's depression. They're more likely to report fatigue, irritability, loss of interest. For anxiety, 3 million, 1,000 people have a panic disorder, agoraphobia, or any other phobia. Bipolar disorder also affects men as well. The age of onset for men is between 16 and 25 years old. Men also experience psychosis and schizophrenia. And this is one of the leading causes of disability. 90% of people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia were diagnosed by age 30, and they're men. Eating disorders also affect men as well. So you might not know that. I know it's kind of a myth that only women are affected by eating disorders, but that is not true. I worked in an eating disorder clinic for a while, and I saw men come in with eating disorders. Some of those men were into sports, so they're kind of focused on their body and, muscle building. Other men that I saw there, they were in wrestling. So I know in wrestling, that's kind of a big thing because you have to kind of be in the weight class and stuff like that. So you can see how that could kind of be problematic in men. All right, so this is kind of heavy. So like Courtney said earlier, you do need to step out of your room. One of us will come out there with you to talk on you. So now we're going to talk a little bit about suicide. So actually the highest suicide rates in the US are found in Caucasian men over the age of 85. Suicides have been on the rise since the 2000s in men. Sexual orientation can influence your risk of suicide. So gay and bisexual men are more likely to develop mental health disorders than heterosexual men. Gay males are at an increased risk for suicide attempts, especially before the age of 25. This could be due to some discrimination that they feel. There's some other risk factors for suicide, including social isolation, substance abuse, unemployment, military-related trauma, genetic disposition. That puts people at an increased risk for suicide, and then gender disparity. So more than 4 times as many men as women die by suicide in the U.S. However, more women attempt suicide than men. So the reason why there's more men dying by suicide is because they often choose a more lethal means. So they might choose, to use a gun or something like that, whereas women may be more likely to use pills. The means that they choose is more lethal. So, as you can see here, there's some stats on substance abuse. So approximately 1 in 5 men develop alcohol dependency during their lives. Homosexual men are more likely to have higher rates of substance use, as well as military veterans. They have nearly twice the rate of alcohol and drug use as women. And so we talked kind of about suicide and substance use, and they kind of go hand in hand. I have a statistic here that 22% of suicide deaths in the United States involve alcohol intoxication. So you can see how those kind of go together. So now we're going to talk about some famous athletes with mental illness. So mental illness can really affect anybody, regardless of their age, gender, income, race, sexual orientation, etc. So we will look at this first guy here, Tim Pearsall. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But he played 20 years of professional baseball. During his rookie season in 1952, he suffered a breakdown, leading to a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Then, at that time, it was called manic depression. So next, we have NBA player Keon Dooling. He had a breakdown in 2012, and it was his lowest point that prompted his recovery process. He suffers from PTSD from years of repressed memories of sexual abuse as a child. Since leaving the NBA, he has become an advocate for sexual abuse victims. And then there's also Earl Campbell. So in 1989, he was a former football professional and Hall of Fame running back and was diagnosed with panic and anxiety disorders. He revealed his struggles with mental illness in his autobiography, which was published in 1999. So moving on, here's just some more examples of athletes that live with a mental health condition. So the former Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback suffered frequent panic attacks after his game. He was diagnosed with clinical depression in the late 1990s. There's Brandon Marshall. So during his time as wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins, he announced his diagnosis of having borderline personality disorder. He spent 3 months in intensive treatment at McLean Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts, where he used dialectical behavioral therapy to work on his emotional regulation. And then there's also Larry Sanders. So he was the center for the Milwaukee Bucks, who left the NBA to spend time addressing his mental health issues, which include anxiety and depression. So that just kind of paints the picture that really anybody can live with a mental health condition, even if you're a celebrity or you're a professional athlete. So, so there's a science of male mental health. So low levels of testosterone are correlated with depression, stress, and mood swings. Testosterone is a mood stabilizer that affects energy levels. So when those levels are low, that can lead to emotional changes. All righty. So seeking treatment. This is kind of a big topic when it comes to men seeking treatment for their mental health conditions. They're less likely to seek treatment than women for depression, substance use, and stressful life events. This is due to social norms, reluctance to talk, downplaying symptoms. Really, this is kind of my thought on it, is that men from a young age are taught to be, tough, independent, unemotional, you just kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you just deal with it. But really, it's not that men are biologically determined that they will be less likely to seek treatment than women. It's really those kind of societal norms that are driving that stigma. If you've heard of stigma when talking about mental health condition, that is a big thing. The negative attitudes that people have towards folks living with a mental health condition. That can be a barrier to seeking treatment. So it's important for men to know that it's normal to feel emotions, and it's totally normal to seek help too. And I'm hoping that kind of these societal changes will start happening in the future. So now I'm going to pass the baton to Courtney to talk about understanding trauma.
Okay, so before we can understand what PTSD is, I want to go over a little bit exactly what trauma is, because often we hear kind of this word thrown around a lot, but I want to kind of dive into a little bit more of a definition so we can get a good understanding of it. So, in definition, this is when we are experiencing something that is very stressful, very frightening, very distressing, and we are having a difficult time coping with it. When trauma impacts someone, it impacts the whole mind and body. And really that trauma takes over the whole person. They're really unable to think beyond what is happening. And I'll get into the science and biology behind that as well. But we see, up here, trauma, there's an intense fear that people feel, a sense of helplessness, that loss of control, because like I said, that trauma is taking over. Not only how the person is thinking, their memory, their cognition, but also, their physical symptoms as well. So different events that can happen with trauma. So you'll see in here when a traumatic event happens, it has these different physiological arousal. So there's emotion, cognition, and memory. And I'll get into a little bit more what memory looks like. But with emotions, typically when people have experienced some sort of traumatic event, it impacts how they feel. So they may have these intense mood swings that are happening. One day they may be feeling really good, really happy, and then all of a sudden there's just something that happens, something that triggers in their brain, and suddenly they're feeling very sad, very angry. A lot of times people who have experienced some sort of trauma, they also have maybe a sense of guilt or self-blame. When we're thinking about trauma with domestic violence survivors, there could be a lot of self-blame that's associated with that. If anyone has ever worked with any DV survivors, there is a lot of blame that comes from that, and it's a hard relationship to get out of when that does happen. So there's a lot of mixed feelings in that when that occurs. There can also be shame, especially when folks are feeling these big emotions and the people around them are experiencing it. And that can bring a lot of guilt and shame to that individual. Because they can't necessarily control what they're feeling in that moment. So it's having an impact on others. And when it affects cognition, oftentimes when we hear of trauma, we hear that people may have nightmares, they may have different flashbacks. There could be intrusive thoughts that people experience, a sense of confusion or just difficulty concentrating. Especially, if people are experiencing those flashbacks, it's hard to focus on the here and now and what's happening. They're thinking about what has happened before and they're really fixated on that. So it's difficult to focus on the task at hand. Think about putting in this presentation. If you have a million things on your mind, it's hard to concentrate on what I may be saying about here. And that's a lot of times with folks who have experienced a traumatic event, they're experiencing in their mind. So then looking at what causes trauma on the next slide. So trauma looks a little bit different for any individual, and I'll dive into different types of trauma and what that looks like in terms of the severity. But what it means by perception of an event, we can all interpret an event very differently. It could depend on maybe how old we were when this happened, the resiliency that we may already have. And again, that comes with age. People who have experienced more in life, right? They kind of know how to handle things a little bit more. I'd argue you all probably know how to handle life stresses more than me. I still struggle with that a little bit. But it can also just be a genetic component too. If we've had people, great grandparents who overcame a lot, that actually is embedded within the biology, within the DNA. So they're able to build up that resiliency through that. So when we think about like the perception of an event, a good one that I talk about sometimes is 9/11. So I'm gonna age young myself, if you will, so kind of younger. But I was in second grade when 9/11 happened. So I was pretty young. I know, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to do that to you all. But I do remember it when it happened, but I was a child when it happened. And talking about with older, adults, or just even, my parents and some of my colleagues, they remember it a little more clearly because they were adults. We talk with interns sometimes, not the age anymore, but some of them weren't even born yet, so they don't even know what had happened. So just thinking about that perception of the event too, we think about, how this has affected individuals, but for me, it's going to affect maybe differently than you, just because of, again, the age of when things happen. So we have to keep that in mind with trauma as well. And then when it comes to trauma too, we may not be prepared for the threat that is about to occur. But that causes our body to respond in its appropriate biological way, which I'll discuss in a minute. So thinking about too, people who maybe have shared similar trauma, we'll use veterans as an example. When coming back after war, everyone maybe have experienced the same thing, but it's affecting everyone a little bit differently. So, when vets come back, some of them may have struggled a little bit more to get back into civilian life. Some of them may have struggled more with flashbacks and different stressors. Others may be able to bounce back a little bit quicker. And both are totally okay. It's all right for, some to maybe take a little bit more time, and it's okay for others to bounce back a little bit quicker. Like I said, everyone perceives trauma a little bit differently, but the most important part is that everyone is coping in their own way. So then we're going to look at big T, little t trauma. And I don't know if anyone's ever heard this terminology before, but I really like this because it kind of simplifies the different types of traumatic events that people experience. And it really sheds light on the fact that, it's all how someone perceives an event. So typically big T, over here we have war, physical assault, sexual assault, etc. I usually describe this as, if you're watching an episode of SVU, this is typically what you see. These are the big things that happen. And when we think about trauma, this is what we think about. This is the first thing that comes to mind. Big T can be split up into acute, so that could be one single incident. It could also be chronic, so it's kind of happening over time. So for example, bullying would be an example of something that's more chronic. This is repeatedly happening. Whereas a natural disaster, that could be acute. That happened one time with someone's experienced that. The ones that people often don't really think about necessarily are little t trauma. So these are most situations that you may feel some sort of disturbance or that are distressing on a personal level. And again, it depends on the individual. So we have examples up here like changing jobs, divorce, a death in the family, frequent yelling in the home, especially during childhood, some sort of financial struggles, family secrets, moving. So there's a lot of different examples up here. But if we look at them again, they can affect everyone in very different ways. So a good example, personal one, changing jobs. So when I switched over to my job at NAMI, like 5-6 years ago, I felt a huge sense of relief. That was not a traumatic experience for me at all. I was much happier and felt a lot better. If anything, yeah, I felt a huge sense of relief coming in from after a role that I just wasn't happy at all. So I wouldn't say changing jobs for me was any sort of trauma. Whereas if we look at an individual, maybe they had a really great job and, something happened and they ended up getting laid off due to shortages, due to cuts, financial reasons, whatever it may be. And that could be a traumatic situation for someone who has worked for a long time at the same company, and then all of a sudden they have to figure something new out. that can be really hard and really challenging. And then that brings up other issues too, like financial struggles, there's a strain on the family and a lot of other cases as well. Another good example could be divorce. So sometimes people feel really happy after a divorce, right? You know, it's kind of a long time for some folks, and they're like, "Whoa, got them out of here," right? Yeah, and for some people that can hit home a little harder, and it can be a little more stressful. So again, it really just depends on the person and their situation and their circumstance. So when people have a reaction to something traumatic, this is normal. It's normal to have a reaction to trauma because they are abnormal events. So as I move forward, we're going to talk about the brain processing and how this has occurred after years and years of human evolving and adapting. So let's look at two different aspects of the brain. So we have the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. But for the sake of, I'm not a neurologist, I don't know if anyone else in the room is, but for the sake of simplicity, we're going to call it the doing brain and the thinking brain. So our amygdala is the doing brain. This is associated with emotion. So it's like fear, motivation, and it processes, it's that central processing all those emotions. So when we have a threat, that is the part of our brain that's going to respond to the threat, the danger, and those intense emotions occur because of that. The prefrontal cortex, which I do know what that's in this part, like your forehead, part of your brain. This is the logical part. So this is where you are thinking, you're problem solving, organizing, whatever it may be. That's that part of the brain. So then what happens then when we're looking at the brain processes for the doing and thinking part of our brain? So our doing brain sends a message to thinking brain when there's something happening. And it says, am I thinking yes or no? I have to think about that. So the example I'm going to share is a bear encounter. I don't know if anyone has ever been walking through the woods and experienced a bear. It sounds terrifying. I've never done it. I don't recommend it. It sounds miserable. But that's always the example I share when it comes to how your brain works when you have threats. So, if you're walking in the woods and a bear is coming up, the doing part of your brain is thinking, danger, danger, this is scary. There's a big threat in the way. It's big and hairy and I'm terrified. So that is what your doing part of your brain is kind of signaling. And then it's sending a message to the thinking brain of what do we do? What's the plan? What are we going to do right now? So you have all sorts of symptoms that are coming up as your amygdala or your doing brain is thinking, this is danger. What happens? What are we going to do? So you have all these sort of hyperarousal symptoms that are happening. If you encounter a bear, I'm personally going to panic quite a bit. That again sounds terrifying. You may freeze up, muscles may get stiff, not sure what to do. There may be a sense of anxiety, heart palpitations, sweaty palms, really starting to freak out a little bit. And then there could be a sense of exhaustion afterwards too. So kind of thinking about after something traumatic, like with a bear, it could be physically exhausting, depending on how the bear is found or what. It's also mentally exhausting because we're, hyper aroused this whole time. And then all of a sudden our body has to go down and calm down. And I don't know if anyone has ever felt the extreme anxiety before and it kind of declines afterwards, but you need a big nap afterwards. It's really, really tiring when you are constantly on high alert and then all of a sudden you can relax and it's like, oh, I just need to smooth right now. So that's kind of what the hyperarousal symptoms look like. So then let's look into the kind of that human response, what I was saying, when you're experiencing a normal response to an abnormal situation. So has anyone ever heard of fight, flight, freeze, fawn before? Okay, yeah. So we typically hear about this often. So thinking about our bear example, one of the responses that we're going to have could be fight. So there could be some anger, aggression. Maybe you want to wrestle the bear because you think you can handle that. That's the way some people respond to traumatic situations, not necessarily the bear. I don't recommend that. But some people, when they're feeling that intense response and they're under that extreme panic, the thinking part of their brain just shuts down.
So that prefrontal cortex, the one that's logical and wants to think through everything, actually all the blood supply just goes away and they're not thinking with that side of their brain anymore. It just shuts down. So instead they're thinking with primal instinct, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So they're thinking again with that part that years and years of involvement, they're thinking with that part as well. And sometimes when people go into this state, they may black out. They may also hyperfixate on the situation in the moment, so they're not thinking about anything else. Like they have blinders on. All they're focusing on is the bear that's happening. So again, they may fight the bear. They have this anger, aggression that's happening. Some people also respond as flight. So they may choose to run away. They're going to run the opposite direction as fast as they can away from it. Some other examples that kind of appear when it's not a bear. There may be some panic, worrying. Has anyone ever heard of like ruminating before? So you kind of like a cycle, just thinking about the problem over and over again, or thinking about the circumstance. So that could also be an example of flight. Freeze. So this was, right away that muscle stiffness. You just can freeze. You're just looking at that bear like, oh my gosh, that is huge bear. It's standing there. You don't know what to do. So again, if people aren't in a bear encounter, but they're experiencing something else traumatic, they could disassociate. This also could be anger. A sense of numbing also occurs, so they're just not really feeling anything in that moment. And then they just feel stuck. They're kind of stuck in this place of, I don't know what to do anymore. And then last one, which wasn't so recently that I really heard about the fawn. But with this, if you're thinking about it from the bear example, this could be if you're, maybe having a picnic in the woods and you see the bear and you're just throwing the food at them. Like, okay, eat the food, don't eat me. Just eat the chips, you can have that, just don't eat me. So kind of the examples with that when you're thinking of other examples, not necessarily bear, that could be avoidance. So people who maybe have experienced trauma, they don't want to deal with a problem. Maybe they're just wanting to please people on what's happening. So whatever, I don't want to cause an issue. Let's just do whatever you want to do. It could also be no boundaries. So again, they'll do whatever anyone says. So again, that could be a response for any sort of trauma that someone has experienced. So again, we see these as very primal instincts when you're walking in the woods and you experience a bear encounter. But this also happens for other people who have experienced some sort of trauma in their life. So then what are some different triggers that can happen after someone has experienced trauma? A lot of times, different things that people may experience are sounds. Certain sounds kind of take them back to the place where things happen, as are smells. Different movements. So if they are seeing or hearing something that's happening, that could cause them to kind of go back to that place. Anniversaries too. So if they know that there's a certain date, maybe that someone has passed away, that could be a trigger for them as well, and what happened to them. As well as different significant life events. So thinking about graduation or a wedding, if someone was really anticipating someone being there and then they're not, because they have passed, then that can be a trigger as well and cause them to experience some trauma too. So with all these trauma triggers, that's where we think about our memories. So memories, they look a little bit differently in the brain. So oftentimes we associate memories when we smell something or a certain color, maybe we hear something and it kind of goes back to a place, and this can be a good thing. There's certain smells that always make me think of like childhood, hanging out at like my grandma's house or, childhood home. They can bring good feelings. But other times, memories, they hold a little bit differently. So if we hear a loud noise, that can cause us to think something else is happening. That is typically what we hear about with, trauma and different veterans, a loud boom that happens, that kind of brings them back to that scene on the war. So typically that's where that memory is stored. They hear that sound and they don't realize it's a car backfiring or a firework. That takes them back to that traumatic response. And this is because memories are actually stored as images and sensations. So, the feelings and smells, seeing things, hearing things, all this is stored a little bit differently, which causes us to go back to that traumatic place. So now that we have a better idea of what trauma is, what it looks like, we'll talk a little bit about what is PTSD, and then when someone is experiencing this intense trauma, when does it become post-traumatic stress disorder? So first, by definition, it's defined as a disorder that has it's persisted over a long time. There are numerous symptoms that are associated with it, and it disrupts the ability to function. So when we define anything that is necessarily some sort of mental condition or any sort of disorder, those are the things that we're looking for. Has it happened over and over again? Are there a lot of symptoms that are associated with it? And are we able to function, day to day? Are we able to work and play and just really enjoy our lives? So typically for people who have experienced PTSD, they've experienced some sort of shocking, dangerous event. And like I said, when we're looking at big T, little t trauma, it really doesn't depend exactly what the traumatic event was. It doesn't have to be that big T, it could just be a continuation of a lot of little T's that happen. Because it doesn't matter what someone's trauma is, it's how it they perceive it and how they react to it. So then some of the symptoms, some of the symptoms that are associated with PTSD, we talked about that hypoarousal. So if you remember, that's that anxiety, the panic, muscle stiffness, weakness, mental, physical exhaustion, reoccurring events, so having those nightmares, the flashbacks, things that are happening over and over again. Another thing too, folks who are diagnosed with PTSD, they have avoidance, so they really want to numb the feelings and the thoughts that they're having. Oftentimes people may use this with drugs, alcohol, and the other kind of addictive behaviors as well. Some things to not think about what's happening at hand, but finding some way to cope with what's going on. So again, if we're seeing a lot of these symptoms, and we're noticing them over and over again at a high frequency, and they're not able to function properly, someone constantly has to have a drink in their hand to be able to go and just enjoy themselves. That could be an instance that there maybe is some PTSD going on. And when we're looking at symptoms too, I'm not expecting any of you to be clinicians to diagnose, but these are always just good things to be aware of, especially if you have a loved one that you're concerned about, and you think, ooh, there may be something going on with them, and I'm just not sure. It's always good to know what these symptoms may be and what is happening, because then you can get them the proper help that they need. And we actually do way more intense training on how you can identify those signs and symptoms. We can talk about that a little bit more at the end too, but if anyone is interested, you can work with folks and get that as an opportunity as well. So then I just want to highlight some of the emotional reactions that folks who are experiencing PTSD may feel. So one up here that you'll see is grief. So oftentimes people may be grieving the person that they used to be, because trauma can really change and shift a person and what they've experienced. Again, thinking back to wartime, if someone comes back after a war, they have experienced a lot of different things that civilians may not know about at all. So thinking about them grieving who they used to be before. There could also be feelings of isolation. So again, it's a unique experience for folks who have experienced their own trauma, and others may never know exactly what that looks like, especially because we perceive things a little bit different. So this unique experience kind of makes us feel isolated, feel like we're the only ones that really know what's wrong, and folks with PTSD may feel this way. They could also re-experiencing the trauma over and over again, even if there aren't those memories or sounds, smells that are making them feel that way. It could be something that's on the forefront of their mind and that they're thinking about over and over again. It's really difficult to cope with that and learn from that. The different cognitive reactions, one up here, memory. We talked about that, but it could be some memory difficulties. One thing to point out is there is memory difficulties and there weren't before. That could be an indicator that there is some PTSD happening. Really with any symptom, if we're noticing something new in the individual where we didn't really notice that before, that could be an indicator there's something going on that we need to take note of. And especially memory difficulties. If someone really didn't have those problems before and then all of a sudden they do, it's worth getting checked out for. The The other one is suspiciousness, I want to point out. They may be feeling like everyone's out to get them. They're really worried about, having an Alexa or Google Home in their house because they're worried someone may be listening in on their conversations. That could be an indicator that there's suspicious behavior. And again, this is, if they've experienced the trauma and then all of a sudden they have that could be that something's going on. I actually have a friend and he's always been this way, but he doesn't like having those devices in his home. He's always been that way. So I wouldn't say for any reason that's because of a trauma response. That's just personal, of course. So thinking about that too and how people are feeling as well. And then some physical reactions. We've talked about some of these. You may have seen these before if you're taking any other mental health related seminars. But one that particular is grinding. So thinking about teeth grinding. I personally grind my teeth. Just I don't know how to do it. But this is actually a stress response. So typically people that do this, they have some sort of anxiety or stress that's happening, and that can be an issue. Just then, it can cause more cavities, it can cause issues with gums. So if you're noticing someone is doing this, they may have a lot of headaches throughout the day, have kind of difficulty staying awake because it keeps them up at night. This could be an indicator something's going on as well. And the other one is the inability to rest. So we have sleep disturbance up here. So typically when we think about resting, is I can't sleep through the night. I'm up all the time, or I just want to sleep constantly. When we're thinking about inability to rest, that's the inability to just relax. At the end of the day, just to be able to sit down and not do anything, or read a book, or watch TV, or just kind of be in the moment. It's kind of that, oh, I need to get up and do this, or I gotta do this, or I'm constantly, moving my leg or sitting, or I have to be moving somewhere or another. That's really that inability to rest. It's that inability to relax and just take a moment for themselves. So that's looking at PTSD, it's looking at trauma. But some of you may have heard before about being trauma informed. Has anyone ever heard that before? Okay. So typically when people hear this, they think, what, I'm supposed to inform people of the things that I went through? And that's not at all what this is. We don't need to know everyone's, situations that they've been through. But we know that there are people who may have experienced traumatic events. When I pulled up the big T, little t, there may have been some things on there where you thought of someone who has experienced that before. I know, when I was looking at the examples, I thought of people instead. But the thing is that we never know what someone has been through. Walking into this room, I don't know your lives or your circumstances, how you got to today, and vice versa. So we don't need to know what everyone has went through, but we need to understand that we will never know what has happened. And we need to be able to be empathetic and sympathetic to what people have experienced in that. So a good example of how we do that at NAMI, we have different support groups that people can attend. And oftentimes people may talk about stressors or traumatic experiences through different story sharing. And we really encourage, we don't need to get into the details of what happened that day. We don't need to know the ins and outs of absolutely every single thing that occurred. Instead, let's focus on the emotions and how you're feeling, and how you're processing everything. So that's being trauma informed right there. We don't need to know what everyone has experienced, all the dirty details. We just need to be there for you, to be supportive and helpful, and have this understanding that we'll never know exactly everything, but it can be that shoulder to lean on. So we think about being trauma informed. We think about what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you. So a good example is, has anyone ever had to call the cable company before? Okay, yeah, confusing. So typically, we call them, and a person may be grumpy on the other, right? So some thoughts that could come up as you're trying to, deal with your cable bill and whatnot. You're thinking, what's up in thought today? Why are they being so rude about this right now? I'm just trying to get my bill fixed, and they're being so rude to me. So we think about, all those sorts of things. So when you're being trauma informed, and you're not necessarily thinking what's wrong with them, but instead what happened to them, they must be having a difficult time today. They must have had a lot of hard calls. You know, it could have been the person before them that called that was really kind of in a bad mood. You know, they could have just had to, you know, pay a really expensive bill themselves, so they're a little grumpy right now. Maybe they don't feel super great. You know, they have a really bad headache or stomach ache and they had to go into work. Maybe they just got into a fight with their partner and they had to show up for work and they don't know what's gonna happen when they go home. So kind of thinking from that mindset when we're talking with people or trying to show some sort of empathy, we never, again, like I said, we never know what everyone has experienced. And you don't need to ask the person on the phone, like, well, what happened to you? Let's talk to you about everything that has occurred in your life. You don't need to do that at all. That's what therapy is for. But you can, you know, just be empathetic with them and say, you know, thank you so much for helping me today. I really appreciate everything that you've done. And I hope you have a good day. You know, little comments like that, that could change the way the person feels that day. It's really just a matter of showing kindness and allowing them the space that they need to feel a little bit better. So everyone has some sort of baggage that they come with, right? And they may just need a little bit of help carrying it. So we don't need to unpack all the luggage that they brought in to the home, but instead we can just help them take it from point A to point B. We can help them get to a better place and feel better with their life circumstances by being trauma. And lastly, we just had a few resources up here that I just wanted to touch base on, and we do have some resource cards as well. So we have the Veterans Crisis Line. This is actually calling the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, so then you can press 1 to get a hold of them. And I think we have some of those cards there. There's a few other phone numbers up here for different veteran services, including NAMI Frontline as well. And there's some different texting options available too. And then the last one up here is mantherapy.org. So this isn't for veterans, but specifically men's mental health resources. They have all sorts of good things on there that are different, like awareness posts and different assessments. So if you know someone in your life that's male, think they may be struggling, you can recommend this website. They do have some funny little anecdotes too. So they keep it, you know, funny. So it's not super heavy as most mental health things are. So really nice building. All right, that is our presentation today. We have our contact information up here. And like I said in the beginning, for the evaluation, make sure you put NAMI education series like that, if you're able to. And then we do have some NAMI brochures as well that Amanda has up. But does anyone have any questions for us?